Let me introduce the panel. I'm going to start with our remote guests right here. We have, to my left, Kira Dieterin with Ekaterra. Kira, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. All right, so far so good. And we have Ben Park with Paraxel. Ben, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but you sound like a robot to me.
That's just Joe.
Well, that's just me, Joe says. And then joining us in the room, we have Clive Ratton with the BTA and Joe Lloyd with Nina and Pinta. So, of course, today we're talking about TMC pricing and compensation structures. And we just wanted to make sure to start that everyone has kind of a shared understanding of the different models that are commonly in play in this sector. So we've asked Joe to just kind of run us through a brief presentation before we dig into our Q&A to just give you an overview of what we'll be talking about. So Joe, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks. Sorry, Clive. Okay. So as Jay says, my name's Joe Lloyd. I'm with Nina and Pinta. And probably a little surprise addition to the announcements today is just in the interests of full disclosure, everyone. From Monday, I will be Joe Lloyd of FCM. So I will be moving across to FCM on Monday as their head of global account management and consulting. So different hats, same opinion. So let me let me walk you through what we have done for you today. So a few months ago, in conjunction with the BTA, Clive and I have been working in the last few 18 months now with some white papers. And one of the first ones that we put out was looking at the fee structure of TMCs. And the second paper was to produce some guidelines. So the vision for those papers was to really bring some clarity around the rules of engagement for everybody in the industry that is working within a TMC pricing methodology. So we engaged corporate customers, we engaged travel management companies, and we tried to find a base of understanding for all parties around the different fee models. So that was the vision. One of the things that was very clear all throughout that process is transparency was a big hot topic for both parties, with very different perspectives. And the other thing that I think is important to mention here is that everybody really felt like there was the possibility for them to be taken advantage of. So the lack of trust was an issue for both parties. So for the travel management companies and for the corporate buyers. Would you agree with that, Clive?
Absolutely, yeah. Repetitive all the time, transparency, and still is.
Yeah, and still is. So this is tiny, so I'm not expecting you to be able to read it. But you can go onto the BTA website and download this paper, and then you'll be able to read it in detail. But really, this is what we refer to as the Jerry Maguire slide. So, you know, the show me the money. So it is a timeline from the 90s to where we are now that talks about, on the bottom layer, the income of the travel management companies. So where their revenue is coming from and the pressure that's been on those income streams since the 90s. On the top, it's the service requirement from the travel management companies. So understanding what was expected of them in the 90s right up to where we are now. So what we can see is there's a clear pressure on the income streams from the TMCs and a higher expectation of service levels. So obviously this can be challenging and a bit problematic. So as Clive and I went into the process of putting together the papers, the conversations that we had focused in really the area of understanding the nature of the TMC relationship and the customer relationship. So effectively, what does the customer want from the TMC? And is everybody on the same page in terms of aligning those expectations? Because from there we can start to get to the fee models and how those TMCs are paid. So the questions we were asking is, you know, in terms of the relationship that you have with the TMC or the TMC that you have with your customers, is that relationship equal? Or is it a sort of master and servant type relationship? Is it strategic, or do you just need a transactional relationship? Which is cool too. Not everything needs to be strategic, right? So it's all about understanding the requirements and matching the fee structure to those needs. Then what aspects of the relationship do you think the customer / TMC values? This was an interesting one because I don't know if you found, Clive, what sometimes the TMCs thought the customer valued was not what the customer actually valued.
I absolutely agree. I think it was really interesting. We went through this. That was one of the big points of difference of what the expectations were from the customer to what the TMCs were, and it clearly was that there was some breakdown in discussions around what was wanted. It was like, this is the product we've got, and we make it squeeze to you, and vice versa. So, fully agree. It was quite eye-opening for me.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. And what was great is having the ability to get that understanding of all of the interested parties and then try to put something together in a way that's going to work for everybody. So we asked, what aspects of the relationship do you think frustrate the other party? Equally as interesting. If you want to get into that in more detail, just have a look at the paper. And then the big kahuna, is there enough transparency in the relationship? Is it important? And ultimately, does it matter? And I think whether it matters or not depended on how they saw the relationship with each other. Was it strategic? Was it transactional? You know, does it matter? So from there, as we started into the process, we tried to figure out which model is best suited to which customer. So this is what we lovingly refer to as our Cosmo quiz of fees. So you can ask yourself a set of questions about, you know, your business is very transactional in nature, there and back trips, you have high online adoption, or you need more offline concierge type service. And so for each of these, it's a guide. It's not definitive, of course, but it's a guide that says you may be more suited towards a transaction or a subscription or a management fee, which were the 3 fee types that we dived into. So the other thing that we tried to get some clarity on from both parties is really defining the nature of the relationship, the type of customer that fee type would suit, things to consider, what could or couldn't be negotiated, and how customized can that be. So as we went through this, Clive and I tried to figure out a comparison in a consumer environment. So what else do we buy and purchase that all of us would be able to understand, because we all buy and purchase, and how could we compare it in the fee models? So we chose mobile phones.
We did.
We did. And so this is the transaction fee. So here, the comparison on the mobile phone is a pay-as-you-go. So the transaction fee model is really compared to the pay-as-you-go model in a phone contract. And so defining the nature of the transaction fee relationship is that at its base point, the TMC is not expected to declare its earnings. So it's not expected to have an open book. Now, I will put a caveat to this, and we'll close out with this, that all of this is typical. It's not defined. So typically you wouldn't expect a TMC to declare an open book in a transaction fee environment. Tends to be suited to SME customers right through to large organizations, so it's scalable, but mostly those with non-dedicated teams. So this is when we start to get into how is the account serviced, what resources are required, and also how the company pays for it internally. Do they have a central pot? Does it need to be allocated out to different business departments, divisions, cost centers, that kind of thing? So these are all considerations that you'll find in the Cosmo quiz to tick through, that is designed to guide you to a model that's going to suit you. So common areas of negotiation in the transaction fee were really what's included in a transaction. That was a fun conversation on both sides. Took ages. When you see the definition on the next slide, you'll see how mind-breaking it was when we finally got there. But things like, are refunds included, split tickets, trip bundling? So there's lots of aspects to think about when you're looking at transaction fees as to what is or isn't included. And there may still be central costs attached to this. So depending on things like account management, for example, if you have 100% of an account manager, there may still be a central charge. So here are how we looked at the costs and how they could be broken down in a transaction fee environment. So typically you will have central program costs. They will be things like traveler tracking, management information, perhaps account management. Then you would have offline fees and online fees. And where we could get both parties to agree a transaction was defined as an inquiry, policy check, book and ticket. About as fundamental as you can get, right?
Stripped it right back in the end.
We'd hoped for more, that's where we landed. Okay, subscription fees, the new kid on the block. So the idea behind subscription fees is that this is typically like a mobile phone contract, where you pay an amount each month and you get unlimited texts or unlimited calls. You can have bolt-ons for things like international calling, but typically this is how you should approach a subscription fee, where a scope of services are defined and a TMC says this is how much you're going to pay for it, and it gets paid for each month. So what's included? Everything that has been agreed within the scope of work. And so it should be really simple, also scalable. So suited from SME customers right up to large corporations. However, the challenge here is that the corporates need to know their numbers, because you're working on a very clear base of this is what we're expecting to produce, these are the resources that we're throwing at it, and the risk is really balanced between the TMC and the corporation. So it's a 50-50 risk. Whereas in the transaction fee, the risk is carried entirely by the TMC, as we all saw 18 months ago when the market fell off a cliff. And that's also not necessarily in the best interests of corporate customers, because you need to be able to keep your supply chain alive, right? So, but this one is more comparable. Finally, we get to the mothership, which is the transaction fees. So the transaction fee in this environment, unlike transaction fees and subscription pricing, the TMC is expected to provide full closure of the P&L as it is related to managing the customer business. Again, another bone of contention between the corporate customers and the TMCs as to exactly what should be included in open booking. So another one that would get them fired up, right?
Very much so, yeah. It was entertaining, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, I suppose. So if you think about the mobile phone contract here, this would be something like an enterprise purchase. So this would be an organization that's purchasing 150, 200 phones and negotiating something very specific. So this is completely customized. It is completely customized by nature and is typically working for customers where you have a dedicated team, and so a TMC is able to accurately assess what their resource costs are going to be. So things to consider, how are you going to approach things like net or private fares? Should markups be agreed in a management fee model or not there at all? And, you know, there's also a hybrid model, which is very common, which is something of a management fee plus a transaction fee. And those transaction fees are used to cover the cost of the management fee. So unlike subscription pricing, it is something that can be used where each cost center, each business unit is paying for their own costs. So items to think about in a management fee, typical items that would be included would cover things in operational costs, program management costs, indirect costs, and profit and fees, because this one is all open. Anything that costs the TMC money to service your business is passed on to you. So that's really the long and short of the management fee. So this is the paper, the guidance on the baseline standards, number 2 in the chapter. The takeaways are that all fees are customizable. Customization can occur in any format, and this is supposed to represent the baseline standard or guidance of what is expected in the different fee models. So it can change. All of them should be as transparent as possible, but also what came out of this conversation is that the customers need to be as transparent as possible as well about their needs and requirements. Because in order to give a TMC a shot at accurately defining how much it's going to cost to service your business, they need to have a good handle on what that business is going to be. Otherwise, they're feeling around in the dark and they're making assumptions, and that's when you get into that trust conversation. So that is the long and the short of it. I think in terms of what could happen moving forward, I think maybe there could be a hybrid of a subscription model and transaction fee model. Clive has a name for that.
Transcription
fee. We're hoping it's going to catch on. We'll see. We leave it in your capable hands to go forward and spread transcription pricing. But that's it. So that's where we ended up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate it. Now let's bring the buyers in. They've been waiting patiently for us. Thank you for still being online. So we went through the kind of key models that are out there in the marketplace. And Kira, I'll start with you. Transaction fee, management fee, subscription, transcription. What model does Ekaterra currently use?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think that we are in a bit of a tricky situation because my company officially doesn't exist yet. So we are still under the umbrella of Unilever, and we are utilizing their contracts. But normally within my previous jobs, I've always worked with a transaction model.
Okay. And is there a reason why the transaction model has worked for your other programs?
Yeah, definitely. It had to do with how the financial streams were working within the company. So I've worked for companies whereas the transaction cost needs to land within the country where the ticket is issued. So the transaction model was the most easiest way for our finance teams to work with that.
Okay, no, very good. And Ben, I'm going to pose the same question to you. What model have you adopted, and are you looking at any alternatives right now? Perhaps transcription. Trying to make it catch on.
Thanks, Joe.
I only got parts of this message, but I could understand Joy very good. Joe, can you repeat this? Sorry.
Oh, you can hear Joe better?
Sorry, Jay, you sound to me like a robot from somewhere.
So, okay, hey Ben. So Jay was asking what fee models you're working on, and can you see a time when you would work with transcription pricing?
I hope I got it right. I understood transcription pricing.
There you go.
That's all that
I'm
matters.
really sorry, and I got that this is the hybrid of subscription and transaction fee model.
You got it.
Yes, so to me, this is maybe the future model, which we all should aim for, because if we look at the TMCs and their fixed costs, which are rising through technology deals and long-term commitments, compared to the past, so their cost for just providing a program to us is going up. Whereas I understand buyers who want to stay flexible on the cost months over months. So that's why I'm a big fan of this hybrid model, because I think it's more fair to both ends, which ensures flexibility, but also covers some of the base fixed cost.
And Joe, can you ask Ben
Yes.
what model they're currently on right now?
What model are you currently on, Ben?
I didn't get that, sorry.
Are you on a transaction fee model now?
The transaction fee model is something which is really good for companies who are passing on costs, like consulting companies. So that's why it really depends on the industry. And for them, it might be a really good model. It's also a good model in the beginning if companies don't know their statistics about number of refunds and all this, because so this could be like an entry pricing model for the first 1 or 2 years, and then you're transitioning in one of the other models.
Okay. And Clive, I'm going to come to you now. My understanding is the transaction-based pricing is kind of the norm, and probably by a wide margin. One is that your understanding as well, and
Yeah, I mean, I think from the research we've done and from all of our time in the industry, that transaction fee seems to be the most popular model that is out there across pretty much any size of corporate that moves. It's the kind of fallback position, I think, from that. And Yeah, and it's kind of came out of going back to that chart that Joe put up earlier to the 90s when commissions were removed from the airlines in particular, and that's been the one that it's set at, and it's stayed all the way through. And it hasn't evolved amazingly, considering how much the industry has evolved since that point, that the transaction fee remains the same. And that was one of the purposes of us getting that conversation out there through this paper, was to say, it's not to say it's wrong, it's just to say, is it time for it to be re-looked at and modernized, and are there any alternatives?
And is the reason for that, because it seems like there's been some degree of satisfaction with the model on both sides over the years, but then, we saw what happened last year, and we were kind of in this situation where when you live by the transaction, you kind of die by the transaction. Did the events of last year really kind of expose that model and maybe be a catalyst to, explore new options?
I think what was interesting is we actually spoken about doing this before this whole mess started, but clearly what it did do is accelerate the conversation very quickly after it. And I think, just the word transaction, and I just mean generally here, that the issue with that, and Joe alluded to earlier on, is that the relationship between a corporate buyer and their TMC is transactional by definition of doing that, and I think it's a whole lot more than that, and it is, hopefully, particularly as we've seen the last 18 months, to be much more strategic. We see very much the industry as being a professional services industry that's helping you as a corporate to reach your global goals, your financial goals, and whatever else. And you do that through working strategically to grow your footprint globally or domestically, whatever it is. And by the word transaction and the way that it was set up, forced that. And through the pandemic, we've seen that change. And again, it's not to say transaction isn't right. It was just like, well, if that's the base, maybe we need to have 2 or 3 bases that you go to, depending on what sort of business you are or what relationship you want with your TMC. And at the moment, we always defaulting to transaction. And I think it's such an important part coming out of this, what we do as a collective, that is the buyer, the traveller, the supplier and the TMC in working together in collaboration to make what is a very complex process even more complex now, move forward. That cannot be transactional, and it can't come just down to that single one cost. So I think it was really important that we'd held this discussion beforehand, and sometimes you're lucky in timing in a bizarre way. This came along to really speed the conversation up.
Right. Okay. And Joe, it seems like you have to first ask a question. Where does the TMC provide value, and how do you create that value and price it, right? Because I don't know, maybe you disagree, but it doesn't seem like too much value is created in driving a transaction, right? It's all the other stuff.
It's all the other stuff. Yep.
So can you talk about that a little bit? How do you identify the point of value to the client and then carry that on to the commercial arrangement?
Well, I think that's right. And honestly, I have to say that, I don't know that the TMCs have been their own best advocates for demonstrating their value, because, we operate in a service industry. And so all of the things that a TMC tends to do, they see as standard. So they don't see that as adding value. They see it as just doing their job. But actually, that's the stuff that a corporate customer really values. So I think as an industry, they haven't been that great at extricating that value and then talking about it as to what differentiates them from a BA.com, for example. Yeah. And there's plenty that does, but I just think that they haven't been the most vocal or effective at communicating that to the customer. So the point of value for a customer depends on their program. And, there is no one definitive thing. So it very much depends on understanding the program so that the TMC is able to put together the best value proposition for that customer. So that's where the conversation needs to take place, and where sometimes the nature of the relationship can work against that conversation. So with those trust issues that we talked about in the first instance, you'll have customers going, well, I'm not going to tell you anything about my program, but actually I want you just to tell me how much it's going to cost me to service. Right. And well, how are they supposed to do that? Or without doing it coming in at a really high level, because they have to factor in all different contingencies that might not be the case. So I think open, honest conversations will be more beneficial to that entire identifying what the value is. I don't know what Kira and Ben think about that. They might think I'm talking rubbish, but they are probably the best people to articulate what they see as TMC value.
Kira or Ben, would you like to kind of like talk through the things that you value in your TMC partnership? I'll ask Kira this because I don't think Ben can hear me, so maybe you can translate my robot voice to him after Kira addresses it. But Kira, sorry, what are the key things that you seek for your TMC to provide, your company? What are the things that you value?
I didn't quite catch the last part of it, but I think you're asking what we value from a TMC, right? What
yes.
we desire them to do. So I think, as Joe mentioned, you see that some things are basis. How you book my travel, I don't really care. It's just something that you provide as a service. And with which technology you think that is best suitable for me, that's also totally fine and discussable. But on the other side of things, you often see that if we are in an RFP process and we advise the TMC what we are looking for in addition to the normal stuff, you get a lot of sales talk and a lot of personalization and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And everything seems to be possible. Until the moment you sign the contract, you go into the implementation and then are faced with, but this is actually not something that is possible, or there is an additional cost to it. And I think that there is the lack of transparency and the lack of trust coming into play again, because at that point you feel that you're being tricked into a contract and you might have made another choice if you would have known it up front. Mm-hmm. And then there are a lot of extra costs involved to it as well to make it work. And I think that is just a breach of trust at the early stages of your relationship. And I think that for both parties, that is something that you need to avoid at all times.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Can I come back?
Yes, yes.
Because I think it's a really interesting point, but it equals the other way round as well. And this is the whole issue that we've got as an industry, is because if you're a TMC, you're desperate to win that business and you're not getting the information you need, you throw everything at it in the attempt to win the business and then negotiate, what you can actually deliver after it. So I think it sits both ways, and this is what we're trying to address, and having this open conversation, which is all we were trying to have from this, is how do we make it much more transparent, to keep using that word, right from the word go, and set out what the expectations are. And also that if you can't deliver it, that it's not necessarily going to preclude you from having an opportunity to deliver it later in the contract if you can go elsewhere, or actually still have a chance of winning that contract because you get 80% of what is needed and you can grow into it. So I think it is really part of this is so important that if you don't, the point being made there is the trust is lost immediately and it becomes a relationship that is grating from the beginning, and we've got to change that in this industry. Without putting a merciless plug out there, today we launched with Joni and Pinter the guide to RFP process for TMCs and the corporate buyers and for suppliers, again to try and take it to the step before when you're actually thinking of going out there, what is it you need, and going through that process, and both sides understanding what the process is to try and alleviate that whole example that's been given. It just has to change.
Yeah.
Sorry, John.
And Clive, I want to follow up on something there. What are areas where the buyer can be more transparent to the TMC partner? I mean, where, we talk about, lack of trust and transparency, what can the buyers do to kind of address that?
Well, I think the biggest one, again, as we mentioned before, is actually having the handle on the data and the numbers. Now, clearly in the current environment is pretty hard, and that requires a whole different approach from the buyer and the TMC. There's got to be a whole lot of trust on what's going to come out the back of this. But if we talk pre-pandemic, it is seen so many of our members, the issue they have is trying to pitch for a piece of business without the full data, or it not being entirely what it turns out to be. I think the expectations of the service level are really important to be really drilled down and defined, so you can create something, because it's very hard if you just a very bland request for service to differentiate yourself as a TMC as well. So you want that opportunity to be able to differentiate yourself by understanding exactly what the service level is, and if you get that right at the beginning, you can create something that starts the relationship in the right way. And I think it is just about moving on from being a transactional relationship to seeing it as being a strategic relationship, and that will reap its benefits as time moves forward. And I think TMCs from that point of view, speaking generally for them, is that would be a real massive plus. And then when something is going wrong, is being open around it. And the last point, I think it needs to involve a lot more people within the buyer or the organisation, because a lot of the time I've experienced when I was running a TMC on the small side is the traveller didn't really understand what the TMC did, the buyer did, but we weren't able to get access to them and understand it. So just using that as a single example, particularly now when you've got such things as looking after your travellers as well as downstream and upstream, and that involves HR and finance and everybody, is to have that whole relationship.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'd add to that actually, Jay, is because data is one thing and it's really important because you need to know how you're going to staff and how you're going to service and manage a client. But expectation is intangible. So it's very difficult to match that with a document that is detailed down about what somebody's expectation is. And to Clive's point, different stakeholders in the business have different expectations of what that service should be. So the way you sort of navigate that, in our opinion, I'm talking collectively now because of the RFP paper, dear. So the way you sort of navigate that is to take it off the page, right? So it can't all happen in an Excel document. There needs to be conversations, there needs to be discussion. Of course, there needs to be governance and there has to be process, but you have to understand each other. And it's like any relationship. The way that you understand each other is to talk to each other, because a lot of this is about chemistry. Every time you talk to a customer or to a TMC, they'll all say the same thing. Cultural fit is the most important. You can't put that into an Excel document. That's the chemistry. If you go back to something like a Match.com, I'm going back to analogies
What's
now.
that?
It's a dating site, Clive. You don't need it. So if you go to Match.com, you plug everything into the system and you say, this is what I'm looking for. Here's my star sign. This is my favorite color. This is the thing I'm looking for. And you can get a match, and then you can go on a date and there's just no chemistry, right? So a TMC relationship with a customer and a customer relationship with a TMC is a bit like that. So you have to kind of take it off the page and see if you're a good fit. And then a lot of this stuff just automatically falls away. To Kira's point, when that doesn't happen, and then it's like, yeah, we can do anything. Now, what's the question?
Right.
That's when you get into that delivery aspect of, yeah, but didn't you say you could do that? Well, yes, but that was, so, and then the whole thing just goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that often comes up, and hopefully you can translate something like this into a question for Ben after I put it out there, is just the notion of all the supplier revenue or other sources of revenue that a TMC gets. We talked about these trust issues.
Yeah.
It would seem management fee approach would give you the most transparency into that. So there's one option if that's really what you value is, transparency. But I don't know, like Joe, how big of an issue is that really, and what are the different flavors of that issue depending on the model? Just where else are you making your money, and how are you kind of taking my volume as a buyer to kind of make money on the other side of the house?
So to me, and Ben, I know you've got thoughts on this, so keep me honest on this, but I think for me, the customer needs to know that the TMC is acting in their best interest. That's what it comes down to. So rather than focus on the issue, focus on the root beneath the issue, because then you can try to understand. So they need to know that the TMC is acting in their best interest. When revenue streams are coming in from other channels, that muddies those waters. So a management fee is the most transparent way of making sure that a customer is acting in the best interests. In theory. Right. In reality, it may not be the case,
right. I don't know how you audit that or how you, kind of.
Well, again, it comes down to the intangible,
right.
And, but really depending on the size of the customer, do they really care about that? Should they really care about that? Why do they really care about that? When I walk into a supermarket and get something like go and buy a Coke Zero, for example, I'm not questioning how much that cost, but then that's not a strategic thing for me. I'm just going in, I want a Coke, that's it, transaction, done. I don't care how much it costs. But, if I'm buying something else that is of a much more strategic nature to me, then I might ask more questions.
Absolutely.
Ben, what do you think?
There you go.
I got this. The topic about revenue streams and acting in the best interest.
There you
because
go.
I think this is the biggest challenge where TMCs are put in a very difficult position, because when they act in the best interest of their company, they cannot act in the best interest of a buyer. As an example, for them, it's better to sell me a hotel where there is no net fare because they get commissions back. So they are basically cutting their own revenue if they provide me the best deal. So the best TMC to me is the one who keeps their profit the lowest with me, which is not good for them. So I think the model we have is broken in itself because the TMCs are often incentivized for not doing the best of the buyer from other suppliers.
Very good. And Ben, do you have any ideas on how to rectify that?
I mean, one thing is really sitting down with the hotel industry, with the airline industry on working on the different revenue streams to say they need the incentives for selling a net fare, but ensuring compliance with a preferred program needs to be higher incentivized than selling their own fares, as example. So we need to work that the incentives for promoting a managed program are equal or larger than selling something from an unmanaged pool.
Yeah, no, that's good. Does that exist, Joe or Clive? Have you seen anyone kind of go down that that type of path?
No.
No.
I mean, I think the world is changing fast in what we're doing, and revenues and incentive revenues for the industry. We all know it's well documented out there are being under challenge, and you're not sitting here claiming poor TMCs, but you're being squeezed from both sides. So it is particularly difficult. But I think if you move in the new world. And you talk about management fee as being the best way, then yeah, that does give transparency. But doesn't it come down to, if you think you're getting value for money, it comes back to this point now, whether I go to John Lewis or Aldi and I choose to buy something there, I decide I'm getting the best value and I may be paying 20% more elsewhere, but I go home satisfied or not, as the case may be. And I think this is unique to me. I think from what I've seen, people may disagree in the industry that we have this whole issue around the money flow being thrown open to everybody within the piece and it all getting squeezed. And it doesn't seem to serve the purpose to either side, right? So, because we both disagree around it. And I think we need, what the role of the BTA is not to tell anybody what to do, but it's just to create the debate and try and move the industry to a better place for everybody. And this kind of debate is really important. It's, I don't know if there's any suppliers in the room today because it involves them, but we still see it in silos. TMCs have conversations with suppliers around how we move forward, and then we have conversations with our clients, and we don't particularly talk all the way through, because what we need is an industry that is financially sustainable for everybody. So it's the right price for those that are buying it. It's enough for TMCs to be able to invest and give that great service, and it's right for those airlines, hoteliers, what have you, to deliver the products that they're being bought. And we've become so fragmented, and it's become, I use the word civil war within the industry going on. And one person we've forgotten about is the traveller in all of this. We've all been fighting about where the cost comes, and we've lost that piece. So I think it's time to have that discussion, and I think there is a better way of doing it. And this part of this debate is really very much around it. But there has to be a way of parking this, this argument and saying this is the way that the industry moves forward. We have a single window of opportunity right now, driven by something that has been really bad for all of us, but it gives us a window of opportunity to make it right.
No, that's good. And Kira, I wanted to come to you because Clive kind of, touched on this issue. But as a buyer, how much does cost factor in to TMC decision making? I mean, you don't have to give me like an actual ranking, but is that what you're trying to do? Is hammer down on cost? Or are you saying let's focus on the service, and then the price of that service will come? Like, how do you think about the cost element in TMC decision making?
I think as much as company preach that it's all about the customer experience or the traveler experience, down the line it always comes back to the cost piece of it as well. Because honestly, I can focus a lot on experience and on providing all these great services and technology to the people. But if I need to have the conversation with my finance team and with my procurement guys that is going to cost us 10,000 euros more per year, then they will say, no, we're not interested. We just need a TMC which is going to book our trip, nothing fancy about it, and we're not going to overpay. So I think it has two sides to the coin, but cost will always be a factor to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clive, how do you receive that? Has the service become commoditized? Kind of procurement kind of gets in and like, let's just hammer this down. Have the TMCs found themselves commoditized?
I think there was a period where that might have been true, but I think that's less so. I think from a price point of view, it feels commoditized, but by what the service that TMCs deliver and how they've expanded their services, I really don't believe that to be the case. It's just we still got to find the right balance on payment. And it's interesting you say, okay, if you're going to put our fees up by £10,000 to use this TMC, that's not going to be welcome. That's a job we really have to get over, just using that as a random amount. But if the production and the return on investment of that corporate was then 5 times what it was previously because of the way they're traveling, then that becomes a good investment. So it's really important that, I don't know how we do this, and I will keep doing this in every way that we can to try and get this message across, is that cheapest is not always the best. It's about the goals that you want to achieve, and that comes back to the RFP and the objectives. Is it that you want to retain the best talent that you've got within your corporate, and therefore you want a really top spec travel experience and you want to deliver that to your customers, or you just want it transactional, in which case then make that clear, and we can design as a TMC the service that you deliver and not have it commoditized. And it is a word, it's a bit of a dirty word, commoditization, within this, but I think we need to get past that. It's about bespoking, it's about design, and it's about just delivering what both parties want and being a little more honest about it.
But I think, just jumping in on that, I think in some ways the industry has commoditized itself. And, that's because if we go back to that Jerry Maguire slide and see how TMCs used to make their money, they were a distribution chain for the suppliers, right? So the income stream would come from the suppliers, not from the corporate customer. So when that revenue dried up, it was replaced with a like for like. Because let's be honest, if we sat down and invented a TMC today, we wouldn't go, oh, this is the model we're going to apply, right? It's the model that we've inherited, that we've grown into, and each decision that's been made along the way has made sense in its time. But now we kind of get here, and like Clive said, it's not really working for anyone. So, there is a value in the relationship, and both sides collectively need to come together and figure out what that looks like and how to price it and how to pay for it in a way that makes sense within a corporation, because you can't suddenly just drive in a huge central cost. But you need to find a way that the TMC is not operating by the seat of their pants, like we just saw 18 months ago. 95% of their income stream dried up overnight. So from an assurance of supply perspective for a corporation, that's a disaster, right? So you need to have your TMCs in business to be able to service your business. So there has to be a better way.
And it's not to forget the supplier part in all of this conversation as well. I spent most of my career in airlines and commercial here in the UK. And my biggest frustration in dealing with my head office was the fact that they saw everybody the same. And I would know that the TMCs were delivering on average about 6.5 times higher yield than my own airline website, and actually the OTAs were actually worse value than my own airline website. So that's where I wanted to focus my energy on distribution cutting. But with TMCs, I really wanted to work, because I couldn't, get that yield myself, and I certainly couldn't get it at that price. And that's why I call on the airlines particularly, but it works for hotels and everybody else, is to recognise and see the distribution channels far more differently than they do today, and recognise that and work in a different way, because you have to. And that may then start alleviating the conversations as you move into the buyer as well. So
well, it's quite interesting that you say that, because in the work that we were doing around the TMC RFP paper, we engaged with the suppliers and we spoke to the suppliers, and I'm going to keep this very anonymous in terms of the suppliers that we talked to, and you're going to see why in a second. Because when they looked at their distribution costs back in the day, they would pay the TMCs, they would get the business. Then they decided, actually, if they went straight to the buyer, paid the buyer, they'd get the business, right? So that's the corporate deals for Ben and for Kira. Now they're realizing, actually, no, the power sits in the hand at the decision point of sale. We're going for the traveler. And with NDC and with the ability and the knowledge and the data and the tech that they have, they can go for the traveler. So that's where they're focusing their investment now, not in the TMC, not in the buyer, but actually directly at the traveler. And that was quite interesting and eye-opening when we had that conversation with them, because they were like, yeah, no, this is where we're focusing our attention now, to the traveler.
And let me try to get this to Ben. Hopefully you could hear me, Ben. We were talking about NDC, and I know there's some TMCs out there that at present, if you want to book, kind of a non-conforming kind of transaction, maybe something NDC, something that requires a little more work, there's another fee for it, or a separate fee. So Ben, I just wanted to understand, what do you think about that? And are there other fees that TMCs have introduced that you kind of think, okay, enough?
Yeah, good question. I'm hearing from a lot of buyer colleagues that TMCs offering NDC fares but are adding a surcharge to this. Again, it goes to the transparency of revenue streams, because on the other side, nobody's talking about the additional incentives an airline gives to a TMC for selling NDC content. So the question is it net zero at the end, or are the TMCs really paying more for booking something on NDC? So to me, that's something where I think the TMCs try to be fair, but the GDSs and the airlines are fighting, and it's on the back of the buyers and the TMCs, what's happening there. So I'm seeing these fees, and I trust TMCs that they really have higher costs at the moment. But I think it's a sign of how broken the industry is.
Clive, I saw a little bit of this when you were hearing, so I want to hear what you have to say.
I was hoping those 3 letters weren't going to come up today. But,
it's another session.
That's the next white paper, but seriously, it is. TMCs are being charged additional by airline for accessing content. That's not a secret, but it's not an even playing field either. It's different from one to the other, and it's hugely frustrating. But again, we're focusing on the cost of NDC when NDC is about airline retailing and the service and the products it's offering to the end client, and that's what we've got hung up on again. And that drives me to distraction, frankly, that here we are 5 years in, and that's still talking about where the cost is moving on and not about the fantastic benefits of moving the industry into the modern retailing world. But yeah, it is one we've got to get over, and it is the frustration again for the industry, because it's throwing something else into the trust transparency argument that we don't need right now. And we need to, as an industry, stand up to that. And I think the client, most importantly, needs to stand up and say, what does NDC mean for me, and what do I want from it? And it's not a scrap over how much it's going to cost to get it from one place to the other.
Do you have any questions from the audience, like in the old-fashioned way with a hand raise? I'll take that as a no. Oh, there we go, a brave soul.
Just make one comment, really, from what I'm hearing, which is an old adage. Sorry, I'll start that one again. So there's an old adage, really, that you only start arguing over cost and money when there's something wrong with the relationship. So I think that's been highlighted here. And in my 20 years, I've seen it happen, I've seen it evolve. And you guys have done a great job highlighting it and bringing it out. And the interesting thing for me is that separation of the transaction fee side, so the simple cost of booking the ticket, which is a simple act, it's a commodity act, if you like, but then the service side, which is so important and so valued. And if the clients want that, let's hope they pay for it. Hence the idea of a subscription to pay for the service, and that separation. And if the client isn't getting the service from the TMC, then I guess they will either bin the subscription or get a rebate on it, or however it's decided there. But this lack of trust is there and has been there for a long while, a huge shame, and it's obviously on both sides. Hence, it's reduced just an argument about money.
Any thoughts on that?
Comment correct. I think to me, it's not only the relationship which makes people question the TMC cost. It's also the lack of ability from a TMC to show the full value or the full package people bought when buying a ticket. So when you buy a ticket or a trip, you're buying as well risk management, you're buying central payment, you're buying reporting, you may be buying a hotel reshopping. There are so many things on top where the traveler doesn't know they're getting all these services. They get in the app gate changes. So I think the relationship issue is a result of still an industry challenge to tell travelers in a better way. And we buyers, it's our fault as well. We don't communicate well enough all the services which are included when selling a ticket. So I think it's not only the relationship.
I mean, I fully agree with Ben on that. I think we, as an industry, we haven't done well enough in getting that message out. And it's really weird because I've been in this industry 40 years, and the great thing about this industry is people get on. It's a fantastic relationship industry right the way across. But when it comes to the actual nitty-gritty of a negotiation, those two people that get on really well seem to have this issue around the trust piece. So I think part of the role of the BTA moving forward, and we're a long way from getting that, is to promote not only to the buyers and the travelling public, but to government and to the wider media, or the value of what travel management industry does. And that's what our day job for the next however long it will be, because I think it's really important that we spread that message exactly, that it's not just booking a ticket. I get very frustrated when MP says, "Oh, you guys are travel agents." Not travel agents. And let me tell you, how long have you got? And so that's the basis that we've got to do it. And I think that will help if the industry and everybody around it and on the periphery really grasp fully the extent of the work that the TMC does in relationship with the corporate. Then that's going to make these discussions, I hope, easier. But it's crazy. We're in 2021, and in my opinion, we've still got some work to do on that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that's right. I think we can also simplify the pricing. Sometimes in an RFP, even on a transaction fee basis, you need a PhD to navigate your way through it, and no two are the same. So no matter how much consultants like me might try and make it look the same with a standard template, it never is. So it's really difficult then for a corporate like Kira, like Ben, to understand what that total cost is for that contract, even on something as simple as a transaction fee. So there is an argument, even in the models that we have and that we live with now, to just make life a bit simpler. And instead of things like passing on costs for NDC, just say, this is how much we're going to charge you for a ticket, and it doesn't matter. But that might mean that transaction fee is higher than it is now. So then it's up to the corporation to say, okay, we accept that, but it's nice and simple, and I know that, however you book it, you're just going to book it, and it's going to cost me $10, whatever.
Absolutely. So we're nearly out of time. I am told that I'm supposed to remind everyone to take the session survey that's in the BTS app. And then for those of you streaming, I think it's on the webinar console. You'll be prompted to fill that out at the end. And I do know we have to end right in about a minute, so I think we'll just close it now before the live stream goes dark in the middle of another good conversation. But thanks so much for joining us, Kira, Ben, Clive, Joe. Really nicely done. I enjoyed catching up. Round of applause for these people.